am Amanda, 35 years old and the mother of 2 children who are my entire world. Jack and Emma, 10-year-old twins with bright eyes and fragile hearts. After my divorce, when I thought life had already stripped me of everything, I moved back into my parents' house. At the time, I told myself it was a blessing. They said it was temporary, just until I got back on my feet. And after working 12-hour shifts at the pediatric hospital, I was grateful for the extra hands, for the promise of family support. But I should have known better. I should have remembered the way favoritism ran like poison through my childhood. The way my brother Stephen was always the golden child. And I was always the responsible one, the invisible one. I told myself things would be different now that I was an adult, a mother. I was wrong. At first, it was small things, the kind you can ignore if you want peace. My twins were given the smallest room in the house, while Stephen's visits were met with feasts and gifts. My parents smiled at Ethan, Stephen's baby boy, as though the sun rose only for him, while Jack's drawings and Emma's soccer medals were brushed aside, barely glanced at before being tucked into a drawer. Still, I bit my tongue. I told my children to be patient. I whispered, "It's just for now. We'll have our own place by Christmas." But Christmas came and went, and instead of stability, the gulf between my children and their grandparents grew wider. Ethan was paraded like a tiny king. My children became background noise. And no matter how many shifts I picked up, no matter how many nights I went without sleep to save for a new home, we remained trapped inside a house where love was conditional, and my children were reminded day after day that they were second best. It escalated slowly, like a pot of water heating until it boils over. Stephen and his wife announced renovations on their large house, and without hesitation, my parents offered our space. They moved into the home we were already crowding, filling it with new furniture, expensive cribs, high chairs, while my children's beds still creaked in the cramped room we had been promised only temporarily. One evening I came home exhausted to find Emma crying on the porch, because Grandma had scolded her for jumping rope in the backyard too loud for Ethan. Ethan wasn't even asleep. He was inside giggling in Melissa's arms. My daughter silenced in her own yard. Another day Jack ran to show my mother an art project that had been chosen for a district exhibition. She waved him off because she was helping Melissa choose curtains. I watched his small shoulders slump and something inside me cracked. The message was loud and clear: their triumphs were inconveniences, their voices interruptions, their very existence less. Still, I tried to swallow my rage. I reminded myself that I needed their roof over our heads, that I couldn't afford childcare without their help. I told myself to endure for just a little longer. But then came the moment that broke everything. It was a Tuesday. I was at the hospital juggling patients when my phone buzzed with desperate messages from my children. "Mom, Grandpa, and Uncle Stephen are moving our stuff. Another grandma says we have to live in the basement. It's not fair." My heart stopped. The basement. The cold, damp, mold-stained basement that barely had a window. Jack had asthma. The thought of him sleeping down there made my blood run cold. I raced home, fear and fury colliding in my chest. When I opened the door, I found my kids huddled together on the couch, their eyes red from crying. My mother sipped tea in the kitchen, Melissa beside her, calm as queens. "We needed more space for Ethan," she said casually. "Your kids can adapt. They're older." My father and brother nodded in agreement. Older. Adapt. Less deserving. That was the moment I realized the truth I had been denying. They would never see my children as equals. No matter what I sacrificed, no matter how hard I worked, Jack and Emma would always be treated as shadows in the presence of Stephen's child. And as I looked into my children's tear-stained faces, something in me hardened. I smiled for them, though my heart was breaking, and I said 3 words that would change everything. "Pack your bags." I carried the bags myself, stuffing clothes into duffels, with a speed that startled even me. Jack clutched his inhaler. Emma clung to her stuffed rabbit. Both of them looking at me with wide, fearful eyes. My parents watched from the kitchen doorway, their faces cold, unyielding. My mother's lips pressed into that familiar line of disapproval, the same look she had given me as a child, whenever I dared to demand more than scraps of affection. Don't be dramatic, Amanda, she scoffed, swirling her tea. They're children. They'll adjust. You're overreacting. I turned to face her, years of swallowed words rising like bile. You took their room. You shoved them into a basement that isn't even safe, and you dare tell me I'm overreacting. You've treated them like burdens since the day we walked through your door. But Ethan is worshipped. He sneezes and you all rush. My kids accomplish something and you can't be bothered to look up from your wine glass. Stephen laughed, leaning against the counter, smug as always. Maybe if you'd made better choices, Amanda, you wouldn't be here begging for handouts. We don't owe your kids anything. My vision blurred with tears, but my voice grew sharper. You're right. You don't owe them anything, because you've proven again and again you're incapable of love without conditions. Emma's hand slipped into mine, her tiny fingers trembling. That was the moment I decided I would no longer beg for scraps of family. We walked out of that house under the heavy stares of everyone I once thought I could depend on. It was dark outside, the November air biting, but it felt like oxygen filling my lungs for the first time in years. My children climbed into the car silently, too scared to ask where we were going. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have savings that could carry us for long. But what I had was resolve burning like fire in my chest. I drove aimlessly until I found myself parked in front of an old motel on the edge of town, the neon sign buzzing faintly. It wasn't much, but it was ours. That night, as the twins lay on the lumpy bed wrapped in thin blankets, I sat by the window staring into the darkness. Every sacrifice I had made to keep peace under my parents' roof suddenly felt like a betrayal to the people who mattered most, my children. I had let them be diminished, ignored, erased. But no more. The next morning, I pulled every contact I had from my years at the hospital, every friend from college, every distant connection. I swallowed my pride and asked for help, not for me, but for Jack and Emma. Slowly, pieces began to fall into place. A coworker offered to cover shifts so I could interview at a clinic with better pay. A church group brought groceries. Even my old college roommate reached out, offering a temporary place for us to stay. My parents, of course, wasted no time spinning their version of the story. They told relatives I had stormed out in a fit, that I was unstable, ungrateful. Stephen told anyone who would listen that I was jealous of his success. But whispers started to circulate. Neighbors noticed how my children had been pushed aside, how Ethan was paraded like a prince while Jack and Emma were scolded for breathing too loud. And then came the day I received a letter that changed everything. It was from my grandmother, my mother's own mother, a woman my parents rarely spoke of because she had always disapproved of how they raised us. She had heard what happened. In her shaky handwriting she wrote, "Amanda, you and your children come live with me. My home may be small, but you will always have love here." I cried as I read it aloud to my twins. Jack's shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks. Emma smiled through her tears. We packed our few belongings once again, but this time it wasn't with despair, it was with hope. Moving into Grandma's modest home was like stepping into sunlight after years of shadow. She adored Jack and Emma, listening intently to every story, every joke, every song. Their laughter filled the halls again. My children weren't burdens here, they weren't invisible, and as I watched them blossom in her care, I began to realize that my parents' cruelty had given me a strange kind of gift: clarity. I no longer yearned for their approval. I no longer twisted myself into knots trying to earn scraps of love. I saw them for what they were: hollow, conditional, incapable of seeing beyond their golden child. But I also knew this wasn't over. Because what they didn't know was that my grandmother had quietly set aside something years ago, something meant to bypass my parents entirely. And when she revealed it to me, it would change everything, not just for me, but for Jack and Emma too. Grandma waited until the twins were asleep to pull the tin box from the back of her linen closet. It was dented, the corners softened by years of moving from one shelf to another, as if it had been searching for the right hands to land in. She set it on the kitchen table between us, and smoothed the floral tablecloth like a ceremony. I could hear the soft hum of her old refrigerator, and the tick of the wall clock, as if the house itself were holding its breath. "I should have given you this sooner," she said, voice low but steady. But I hoped your mama would grow different as she got older. I was wrong. She popped the lid with her thumb. Inside were envelopes tied with twine, a small ring of tarnished keys, and a folded deed, its edges browned with time. My pulse quickened in a way I recognized from the hospital when a monitor started beeping out of rhythm. Grandma pushed the deed toward me. Your grandfather and I never put the house in your parents' names. We let them live there for $1 a year because we thought it would keep the family together. Her eyes met mine, clear and fierce. I've watched long enough to see it had the opposite effect. My throat tightened as I scanned the paper. The address was unmistakable, the house where I had raised my babies in the shadow of someone else's child king. The deed still listed my grandparents as owners with a recorded amendment dated 5 years ago, adding one more name, mine. I looked up in stunned silence. Grandma, you added me. I added you after I saw your mama swipe Jack's science fair ribbon from the fridge and toss it in a drawer because Ethan's photos looked neater on the door. She spoke without bitterness, just truth. There's a pattern in this family. It started long before you were born, darling. Your mama was the golden child when she was young, everything handed, everything forgiven. She learned love as a ledger, and she's been balancing that ledger against you ever since. Grandma's fingers traced the wrinkled skin on her wrist. I should have stopped it sooner. She slid over another envelope, heavy, official. This one is a notice. I hired a lawyer. If they want to keep living there, they'll sign an agreement that the home remains open to all grandchildren with bedrooms assigned by age, and need not by favorite. If they refuse, they have 90 days to leave. Heat rose in my face, not from vengeance, but from something cleaner, justice finally drawing breath after years of suffocating in silence. I pictured my mother's pinched mouth, my father's impatient sighs, Stephen's lazy smirk. And then I pictured Jack's inhaler, Emma's stuffed rabbit, two small bodies curled up in the cold basement. Something steadied inside me, like a beam being set into place. There's more, Grandma said. She lifted the twine off another stack of papers and handed me a letter in my grandfather's blocky handwriting. My eyes blurred as I read a fund he had set aside for any great-grandchild of good character, with preference to those who demonstrate responsibility and kindness despite hardship. He named me as successor trustee, if Grandma ever felt too old to manage it. I laughed, but it came out as a choked sob. He never met Jack and Emma. How could he know? Because he knew you, Grandma said. He knew what kind of mother you'd be. In that moment I felt both small and held like a child tucked into a quilt, and promised that morning would come. We made a plan. I would pick up the rest of our things from my parents' house on Saturday. Grandma would come with me. We would not argue. We would not beg. We would hand them the agreement and let the papers speak. My hands trembled when I thought about walking back into that kitchen, into the air that had curdled around my children's laughter. But Grandma's palm rested over mine, an anchor. You're not alone this time, she said. Saturday arrived, mean and gray, frost rhyming the grass. The twins chose not to come. They were at a neighbor's house making paper snowflakes and learning how to tape without wrinkling the delicate edges. I drove with Grandma beside me, the envelope thick in her purse. My lungs felt tight, a phantom echo of Jack's asthma, but I kept breathing in time with the windshield wipers. The house looked the same from the outside, tidy shrubs, a wreath my mother changed with each season. Inside it was as if no one had noticed we were gone. Stephen sprawled on the couch, shoes kicked off a sports game, muttering from the television. Melissa patted Ethan's back while he gnawed on a teething ring shaped like a crown. My parents were at the table, surrounded by catalogs, more things to buy, more proof of love they could photograph. My mother's eyes narrowed the moment she saw Grandma. What is this? She asked, already defensive. A conversation, Grandma said. She didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. She set her purse down, took out the agreement, and slid it across the table along with the keys from the tin box. The keys made a small, clear sound against the wood like a bell at the end of a shift. My father barely glanced at the paper before scoffing. We're not signing anything, he said. This is our home. Grandma tapped the deed. It's mine, she corrected softly. And Amanda's. She turned to me, and her smile reached something inside I had locked away. We are willing to continue the arrangement on the condition that it stops harming the very children it was supposed to shelter. Stephen snorted. "This is ridiculous. You can't evict your own daughter." "I won't," Grandma replied, "but I can evict you." The room went so quiet I could hear the radiator tick. My mother's face crumpled, not with remorse, but with rage at losing control. "You would do this to us for her, for them," Grandma said, nodding toward the small shoes still tucked by the door, the tiny toothbrushes still hanging in the downstairs bathroom. "For the ones you forgot were children." I had rehearsed a speech in the car, a litany of all the small humiliations and the large ones too. But standing there, the words fell away. I found myself looking at the stairs that led down to the basement, to the air I had asked my son to breathe. My voice, when it came, was quiet, steadier than I expected. "This is the line," I said. "Sign the agreement, or we'll arrange a move-out date. I'm done teaching my children to shrink to fit your love." My father blustered. Stephen ranted. Melissa cried theatrically. My mother accused, pleaded, accused again. Grandma watched unshaken. In the end, no one signed. My parents slammed the door on our backs as we left, the sound like a final period at the end of a long, cruel sentence. In the car, I laughed and cried at once, wrung out and somehow lighter. "What if they fight it?" I asked. Grandma squeezed my hand. "Then we'll let the law do what love refused to do." That night back at Grandma's, Jack fell asleep on the couch with a book about planets open on his chest. Emma tucked her rabbit under his arm because astronauts need co-pilots. I watched my children sleep and realized I was witnessing something rare and holy, the return of their peace. 2 days later, the first packet from our lawyer went out, formal notice, a copy of the deed, the terms, the timeline. Attached was a letter I wrote at the kitchen table while the twins did homework. Not a diatribe, not a plea, just a clear record of what had happened and what would happen next. When I sealed the envelope, I felt the distinct click of a door closing behind us. The next door I knew would open with a bang. Because my parents weren't the only ones who'd get a letter. My brother would receive one too, about a trust fund Grandpa created for great-grandchildren that Stephen had tried to access with fake school expenses for Ethan, a fraud Grandma had quietly documented and never confronted. That would be the second match in a dry house. Sometimes justice isn't thunder. Sometimes it's a steady hand striking flint until a spark finally catches. Ours had begun to glow. The letter must have landed like a grenade. Within days, the phone calls started, first from my mother, tear-stained voicemails layered with accusations. "You've embarrassed us, Amanda. You've shamed this family. How dare you side with her against your own parents?" Then Stephen's voice, furious and ugly, shouting down the line until I hung up. Even Melissa left me a message, her tone sugary but venomous. "You're destroying Ethan's future out of jealousy. One day your children will resent you for this." But I didn't flinch. For the first time in years, I didn't feel cornered. The papers were filed, the clock was ticking, and the power wasn't in their hands anymore. Grandma and I spent evenings at her kitchen table, the tin box always beside us like a witness. She helped me read through trust documents, her glasses slipping down her nose as she underlined important sections. "Your brother thought he was clever," she murmured one night, tapping her pen against the page that detailed Stephen's fraudulent withdrawals. "He thought no one would notice if he wrote Ethan's name over and over. But I noticed. And now the world will too." Jack and Emma thrived in ways I hadn't dared hope. Jack no longer hesitated to show his sketches, spreading them across the table with excitement, instead of shrinking when someone looked away. Emma, who had once cried quietly at night, began humming while she did homework, her little songs filling the small house with warmth. Grandma praised them openly, listening with an attention that stitched up wounds I hadn't realized were still bleeding. Yet beneath our newfound peace, I braced myself. I knew my parents wouldn't surrender without a fight. I was right. The first blow came at Sunday service. My mother cornered me in the church foyer, loud enough for others to hear. "Ungrateful," she hissed, eyes blazing. "We gave you a roof when no one else would, and this is how you repay us." People turned to stare. Some sympathetic, others scandalized. I simply said, "You didn't give us a roof, Mom. You gave Ethan a throne and shoved my kids into a basement." Her face turned crimson, but I walked away before she could answer. For once, I didn't crumble under her words. The second blow came in the mail, a legal counterclaim, their attempt to contest the deed, to argue Grandma wasn't of sound mind. But they underestimated her steel. She marched into the lawyer's office herself, cane clicking against the tile, and signed a sworn affidavit so sharp it cut their claim to ribbons. Watching her, I felt a fierce pride. They had underestimated her just like they had underestimated me. The third blow was personal. Stephen showed up at my work, cornering me outside the clinic. "You think you've won?" He spat, his cologne cloying. "You think this makes you better than me? You're just the bitter divorcee hiding behind grandma's skirts." I looked him dead in the eye. "Better than you, no. But stronger, Stephen. Because I don't need to steal from children to feel powerful." His jaw tightened, and for once he had no comeback. Weeks stretched on the tension taut as wire. Then one evening, Grandma handed me a letter she had just received from her lawyer. My parents had withdrawn their contest. They had 90 days to vacate. The news should have filled me with relief, but instead it left me shaking. Not because I doubted we had done the right thing, I knew we had, but because I finally understood the cost. Whatever fragile ties had bound me to my parents had snapped for good. That night I sat with Jack and Emma at the kitchen table. I told them gently, "Grandma's house is ours now. We won't have to go back to the basement. We'll paint your rooms however you want. We'll fill the walls with your art, your trophies, your laughter." Emma's eyes lit up. Jack whispered, "Really? We can stay here forever?" I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. "Forever," I promised. Grandma raised her teacup in a mock toast. "To forever," she said. And for the first time it felt true. But as I tucked my children in that night, a thought lingered. My parents would never forgive me, and maybe, just maybe, that was the point. The final confrontation came not with shouting or fists pounding on doors, but with silence. My parents did not call again. They did not visit. They did not even send Stephen to gloat or rage. The 90 days passed like a season changing, and one cold March morning, the lawyer confirmed it. They had packed up, left the keys on the counter, and walked away from the house they once used to remind me of my place. I drove by once, unable to help myself. The curtains were drawn, the driveway empty. For the first time in years, that house looked like what it had always been for me, hollow. It wasn't a home. It was a stage where roles were assigned: the golden child, the scapegoat, the silent wife, the overlooked daughter. I had stepped off that stage, and I would never return. Life with Grandma settled into something warm and steady. Jack painted a mural on his bedroom wall, planets orbiting across the navy sky. Emma strung fairy lights and taped her soccer medals where she could see them every morning. Their laughter bounced through the hallways, weaving into the old wood beams like a new kind of foundation. One night, Emma curled up beside me on the couch and whispered, "Mom, why didn't Grandma ever love us less?" The question cracked my heart, but I answered as truthfully as I could. "Because real love doesn't run out, sweetheart. If it does, it was never love to begin with." She nodded, resting her head on my shoulder, and I knew the lesson was stitching itself into her bones. There were still hard days, bills stacked too high, long shifts at the clinic, exhaustion that made me want to crumble. But there was also a lightness, a freedom in knowing I no longer had to measure my worth against their impossible scales. My children no longer had to beg for approval like scraps tossed from a table. The betrayal had cut deep, but in the wound grew something stronger: resilience, clarity, and the kind of bond with my children that no one could poison again. Months later, I got another letter, this time from the trust my grandfather had set aside. The fund that Stephen tried to plunder had been locked in under new management. Not a cent would ever go to greed or fraud. It would go to Jack's college, to Emma's dreams, to futures built on kindness rather than favoritism. I cried as I signed the acceptance papers, thinking of my grandfather, of how he had believed in a goodness he never stopped hoping would rise from the ashes. And it did. Looking back now, I see that my parents gave me a gift they never intended. By showing me exactly how little their love could stretch, they pushed me to draw my own lines, to protect my children with a fierceness I didn't know I had. They taught me through cruelty how to recognize real love when I found it in Grandma's unwavering hands, in Jack's quiet pride, in Emma's endless trust. If you are watching this and you've ever been the child or the parent who felt invisible, who was told they were less, let my story be proof you are not defined by the people who failed to see you. Sometimes the family you deserve is not the one you were born into. Sometimes it's the one you choose, the one who chooses you back. I lost my parents, but I gained something far greater: my children's joy, my grandmother's love, and my own voice stronger than it has ever been. So if this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, subscribe for more stories of resilience and truth, and leave a comment about your own journey. Your story matters. Your voice deserves to be heard.